Welcome everyone. Thank you, Katie and Liz, for organizing this session. Myself, Sushant, I'm an INSEAD alum. I have my colleague here, Alex, as well. Thank you for taking time to join us this evening. We hope everyone is keeping safe and healthy. That's myself, Sushant. I am a COO at CTF Technologies. My primary job is digital product management. CTF is basically a London-based product company. We work in a product on a digital wealth management space. Alex here is my colleague. Alex, do you want to give a brief introduction?
Hi everyone, yeah, my name is Alex. I'm the acting CMO at CTF Technologies, and my background is in user experience, running user experience teams and CRO campaigns, conversion rate optimization campaigns.
Okay. Before I just move forward, Alex, or whoever is available to talk, are you hearing me loud and clear?
I think someone's put in the chat that they can hear us, so hopefully it's all good.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. So moving on, the classic death curve for 90% of the startups. I'm pretty sure everyone here would at least know someone who has gone through the startup journey and exactly had that classical death curve. Founder coming up with an idea, raising an investment, hiring a team, building a solution, and when the solution comes out to the market, the founder really tries to sell the product, but no one wants it. Founder tries to pivot, but there's not enough runway left to pivot, and then founder runs out of money and the startup fails. This is unfortunately the case with multiple people, multiple startups. And it's not necessarily just the startups, it's also the case with multiple projects which goes on in bigger corporations as well, whether it's a digital transformation project or whether it's creating a new product within a bigger organization or creating a new feature. There's a lot of tendency to jump into building the solution. And that is what we want to address today. Me and Alex have worked in multiple startups before, and from our experience, what we try to figure out is what is the best frameworks and the tools to use to avoid the classical death curve. So as we go along, you would hear a bit more about each of these things. Everyone, either you have been to business school or done an entrepreneurship course, must definitely have heard about Eric Ries. He came up with the lean startup approach from his own experiences of the classical model of building first and then trying to figure out if it fits the market or not. What Eric Ries, through his lean startup, proposed was the part where you go into iterative testing mode, i.e., rather than building the whole product, just build a small piece of the product, go out to the market, roll it out there, and figure out how well it is doing, or do you need to pivot or not. This gives you more time to react to the market situation or what the people really want or the problem that you're trying to solve here. That leads me into why a lean approach is better than the waterfall approach. As you can see in the waterfall approach, it's extremely a high risk proposition. Validation of the business proposition happens after the release. Limited number of iteration, it is budget consuming, and at the end of it, if you hit the market with the wrong product, the probability of failure is extremely high. Whereas in a lean approach, you actually reduce that risk by iteratively building small blocks of your product. So you concentrate on the core features first, and then you start building onto the more ancillary features or the side features along with that. What it helps us to do is by increasing the number of iterations, you lower the risk. And Alex, did you want to add anything on top of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, Eric Ries kind of built on this with his lean startup, and I suppose it builds on the thinking of kind of build it and they will come, which is the traditional waterfall approach. But the team at Google took this thinking a step further. And for those of you who are familiar with Google Ventures, which is the innovation arm of Google, they developed this technique called design thinking, and how they improved on Eric Ries's kind of lean startup was to close the gap even further. So they go from idea to learning as quickly as possible, completely to a certain degree cutting out building and launching. And the way that they approach that is through very, very user-centered, story-centered design. And through kind of guerrilla testing the ideas. And guerrilla testing, if it's a term you're not familiar with, is the easiest, fastest way to test an idea. Whether that's standing outside of Starbucks and offering to buy people's coffees for feedback on a scribble on a sketch pad, whatever works in terms of getting feedback from your users as quickly as possible before you kind of write any lines of code. But also importantly, they explore the concept of kind of starting at the end. So what are you trying to achieve, and what are your kind of metrics for success? And through kind of doing their loop of ideation and learning, you're able to kind of reduce your risk even further than the kind of the Eric Ries model. There's a great book written by the Google Ventures team called Sprint, and that coins a lot of the themes we'll be talking about today.
gb.com/sprint, you can find quite a lot of examples where many startups have used this framework and have really succeeded in de-risking the business without spending a ton of money on it. So we're going to build upon that and see how you can achieve the idea to learn shortcut in the most cheapest way possible. So for the example, for the purpose of this desk or presentation, this is what we are going to use. We are going to use an example so that it's easy for us to describe what we are trying to do, and also for everyone to understand. Liz here is our is a person who wants to come up with a spending analysis app. And this is what the value proposition is. The Lisa app will allow users to pull all their banking transactions and automatically aggregate and classify them and display the spending analysis, which is visually easy to understand. And this would help users clearly understand their expenses and be better with their money. So Liz, in this particular case, could be a fresh graduate from INSEAD. Liz could be a professional who's working in a corporate job, but thinks about, oh, there is something better I can do. Or Liz could also be a manager at an organization, and she wants to be an entrepreneur and want to propose an idea to the business. So it does not necessarily put Liz into one single demographic group. Liz could be anyone. It could be any one of us. And I know there are tons of people who come out from business school and everyone wants to do something or start something of their own. So Liz could be anyone for that matter. Now, the tools and structures we have put down here, it may be a bit more focused towards digital tech app, but there is a lot of synergies, or the same principle can apply to other type of products as well. Any organization which is going through a digital transformation or want to figure out what are the best ways to work on building a product can definitely use any of these frameworks we are going to talk about today. Alex, did I miss out anything on this one?
I don't think so, buddy. I think you've covered it.
Cool. So, so assuming Liz want to build the spending analysis app, we just did a high-level rough estimate of how much would it cost Liz to create a very simple app like a spending analysis app. The cost of hiring a team, which includes designers, developers, and all the tools and hosting stuff which is required would easily cost Liz anywhere between 150 grand to 250 grand. And the amount of time required to design, to plan, and to actually develop such a value proposition can be anywhere between 3 to 6 months time. Alternatively, of course, Liz can go and ask a friend who can code. If Liz is lucky enough to have a friend who has all that time in the world to help her out, or she can learn to code herself, which is also a lot of time commitment. It's not impossible to do, but it is a time commitment. I spent 4 years learning how to code in university, so I would imagine it would take at least an year for Liz to learn. I think someone raised their hand. I don't know. Is there a question out there, Alex?
No, I think someone was just practicing. There's a Q&A session at the end. So
okay, perfect. Okay, Christian, if it's okay, we can address any of the questions which you have at the end, because this is in a webinar format, and I think the way it works is we can't open up the mics yet. So please do write down your questions. We would definitely want to address them at a later point of time. Okay, so moving on. Yeah. Sorry, Alex, did you say something?
Last one, we only cut. Yeah, I was just going to say on your last slide, we only focused on kind of cost to build there. But obviously it's worth bearing in mind that when you're trying to take a product to market, that you are also going to incur some kind of launch and marketing costs that we haven't factored into that 150,000 to 250,000 pounds. But it's also always worth considering, obviously, the associated costs of kind of launching your product and market it to your first 1,000 users.
Absolutely. Cool. And one more thing I would want to add on top of that, whatever we have listed on this presentation or slide deck, it does not require you to have any coding or as such any major design skill set experience. So any of the validations which we have talked about in the later half of the deck, it's absolutely for anybody, absolutely anybody. So moving on, the very first stage, of course, is to better understand your business concept or the value proposition is to break it down into hypotheses. And I think this is a very important task which everyone needs to carry out. It is a bit of an ego killer because you trust you know the best solution or the best problem which is out there. But ultimately what the intention is to by breaking it down into hypotheses, it allows you to easily see what are the assumptions you're making in the business proposition. And once you know what are the challenges involved in this or the assumptions, it's easy for you to go and then validate them, whether it's qualitatively or quantitatively, totally depends on the hypothesis itself. We have just given here an example, like for the Liz's app, some of the hypotheses would be that people want to actually do better with their money. That's one of the assumptions we're making here. The other assumption would be classifying and aggregating helps people understand their expenses better. Something else could be like visual display helps people to understand better. So these are the different assumptions Liz has made at this particular point of time. Now, and the de-risking element is not just for yourself, but it is also for the angel investor who's going to invest money into your business proposition, the venture capital who's going to put money into your venture, the future team that you're going to hire, and also the end user at the end of the day. So by reducing the risk upfront, you are creating more confidence and trust as you go along into your business value proposition. Now, in our experience, if you were to walk into an investor pitch or a co-founder pitch with a business idea, where all of the major hypotheses, as much as possible, is validated, your chances of success go significantly higher than what it could have been. Alex, is there anything you wanted to add on top of that?
No, I think you covered it there. It is really about de-risking the project idea. So when we approach this, we look at some of the popular methods that are often spoken about validating your hypothesis. So we've listed out the three most popular ones. So ask friends and family over dinner. Now, that's one that's often kind of spoken about, but the problem that we find with that is that inevitably you're going to get some empathy bias. You know, these people know you, they're your friends, they're your family, and they want to support you on what you're doing. So it's inevitable that any idea that you come up with, they want to see you succeed and kind of encourage you on your journey. The other one that is often spoken about is, you know, run a Google form or run some kind of survey and send it out to your LinkedIn network. Whilst not empathy bias, you do expose yourself there to a form of selection bias, and we ourselves have kind of encountered that when we've been doing some surveying for the product we're working on at the moment. You know, we run out a Google form and we see that it's answered by a lot of people in London, a lot of people who work in the financial services sector, because that's the people that we are kind of connected with and associated with on LinkedIn and Twitter and so on and so forth. And the last one, and probably the most risky one, is, you know, trust your gut and do your own kind of Google research, read as much surrounding information as you can. And unfortunately, that one's going to lead you down a confirmation bias, because you know, we're all humans at the end of the day, and we're all subject to you know, wanting to kind of self-validate our ideas. So it takes a lot of discipline to really identify and acknowledge when you're kind of going down one of these biased routes. You know, one of the most common ones there that we see most commonly is point number 2. So I'm pretty sure that in all entrepreneurship courses that are taught at university or taught at business school, you know, the professors or the lecturers often say, you know, do a Google form and send it out to your classmates. This is pretty much a guaranteed way to introduce a bias into your research and your hypothesis validation. And being aware of your bias is one of the first steps to try and circumvent them. So yeah, as Sushant said right at the beginning, unfortunately 42% of startups fail because they didn't solve a market need, and they failed because they didn't put others first. So it's really about how you can try to understand what the market wants, what is the biggest pain point that they have, what is the biggest problem, you know, and avoid what we call the yes men, people who are just going to agree with you. So is there a better way to validate your business idea? This one here is taken from a great website called yourmumux.co.uk, and it's, you know, just hammering on the point that, you know, your mum is not a valid test market, your friends and family are not a valid test market. Your mother's always going to say, yes, darling, it's a great idea. So you need to look beyond our close networks and always be aware of any biases creeping into our hypothesis validation. Sushant, over to you, buddy.
Okay. So, so the following slides, we're just going to concentrate on some of the validation processes or tools which can be used. So for the purpose of making it a bit more structured, validations can be done at different stages of your business conceptualization or ideation, and you need to use different type of validation methods. So here I've listed down a few. At the very top is basically the problem solution, which is the ideation stage. You know there is a problem out there. For example, Liz has identified a problem probably in her daily life that she's not able to see all her expenditure in an easy to understand format. So she understands that as a problem. But how do you make sure that this is also a problem for many other people? And who is your primary customer going to be? And exactly the problem that you have defined, is it the full spectrum of the problem, or is there a problem before and after that as well? And if the problem is big enough, then are people or the customers ready to actually pay you for a service like that? So that is when you're trying to really understand the problem itself. How big is the problem, or who is the problem more painful to, etc. From there, after you have discovered what the problem is, you go to a point where you conceptualize a solution. That is a concept stage. Then you would be like, okay, for this particular problem to be addressed, maybe I can create a website, or maybe I can create a blog post, or maybe I can create an app, or maybe I can start a Facebook page. It could be any of that concept solution which you have come about. Now, when you are in that particular stage, what you're trying to assess is there a large enough market for your startup to grow? If your intention is to create something which is niche, then of course you're looking at a very smaller group of people with a probably very higher willingness to pay. Whereas on the other end of the scale, you think there's a big enough market out there and it's a mass market product, then how big is the market? From that conceptualization stage, then you move on to a plan where you have identified, okay, it's going to be an app and it would sit on iOS or an app store. And I think it is going to be suitable for the Gen Z audience. Now, how do you know it's actually a Gen Z audience or a Gen Y audience or maybe Gen X audience? Which scale of the demographic it would suit the best? And that is where you can run a lot of validation through a few of the methods which Alex would talk about in the deck. And this would help you inform about what is the acquisition cost going to be and what is the revenue I can generate from those, and how much is the conversion funnel going to be, and can I optimize those conversion funnels? Now, when you carry out these validation at different steps of your conceptualization and ideation and pre-product stage, you are getting more and more confident about the solution. You are getting more and more information about the problem and also about the solution. And all of that would inform you so much better to define your business plan. And ultimately, everyone needs a business plan, whether you want to raise money or whether you want to go find a co-founder, whether you want to pitch it to a CTO. Any of this, you would need a really good business plan. And any of this information which goes into your business plan, which includes validation, it's going to help you and also people who are assessing the business plan as such. Alex, is there anything you want to add on this?
Yeah, I was just going to add that, if you can work towards validating your hypothesis in an unbiased way and gauge market interest and not only market interest but appetite or willingness to pay as early as possible, as Sushant said, it's not only supporting your product idea, but it is significantly reducing the risk, not only for you as a founder, as an entrepreneur, or even internally within your kind of larger organization, but also for any external investors or stakeholders that you want to approach to invest. And as we worked on a couple of projects together now, Sushant, and there's a couple of ways that we do that,
yeah.
Which I will talk about on the next slides.
Yep. So here what we have, just put a matrix together on some of the tool sets which you can use to perform the validation type. I'll just go through briefly here, and then we are going to build on this as we go further down and show you examples on how to do this. Right? At the very top is problem solution, which is basically where you want to understand the problem and the problem which Liz has identified. Do other people associate with that problem or not? And we have figured out the best way to do that is always user interviews. Now, user interviews, which is totally moderated in nature without any visual aid. And what it means is essentially you talking to someone very openly about a problem and the person sharing their experiences about the same problem, what they currently do to address those same problem. And we recommend you talk to at least 7 people during this particular stage to understand the problem. Once you kind of have an idea of, is the problem big enough? Do these 7 people identify with the problem and the nature of the problem remains the same? Then you can scale that up massively to run a survey based on the information you got from the user interviews. And survey is requires a bit more preparation work, requires you to be a bit more specific in your questioning. But the tools nowadays like SurveyMonkey or Google Survey, these would allow you to create those scaled surveys and get responses within a few hours. I remember the last time we put out something on a survey, we got about 1,000 responses in 4 hours. And that is very invaluable amount of information. Similarly, as you go into a product's market fit stage, that is when you have conceptualized an idea. Again, I think it's very, very important for you to go back with some sort of visual aid. i.e., it could be really low fidelity sketches or a high fidelity prototype, whatever you can build, and run the same moderated test, because every time a person is looking at the solution and identifying with the problem, they will be able to give you feedback on whether the solution and the problem actually fits. I think, Alex, you would talk about some of your experiences where you have done that in the future, in one of the future slides. After you have conceptualized and after you have figured out what is a concept that you want to build, again, channel fit, you can do that through certain dark market testing tools like landing pages, social media advert, and banner advertisement. We have all of this much more in detail in the further slide. So if you did not understand anything at this particular point, that's totally okay. As we go along, you would find a bit more comfort as you go along. Alex, you wanted to touch anything on this one?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to your points around user interviews, if you've not done moderated user interviews before, sometimes they can be a little bit daunting, but they're absolutely invaluable. And where we say kind of a minimum of 7, what we find is that generally once you've spoken to about 5 people, you really do start to see kind of patterns and trends along your kind of lines of questioning. And then, you know, the other couple of panelists that you'll speak to really kind of help to confirm those trends and those patterns. So the number of 7 comes from like the YouGov guidelines. And then in regards to kind of dark market testing that we'll talk more about later, that's a concept that's relatively new. It's sometimes referred to as kind of canary testing, and it comes from the paid media space, where usually you would do a similar activity before investing a significant budget in any kind of paid media campaigns. You test what copy and creative and messaging works. But Facebook built out the dark market testing strategy, and they now actually use it when they roll out new features or new product updates across Facebook and Instagram. So they'll run their dark market testing in like New Zealand, Australia markets before refining them and then rolling them out to their European and US market. And so on that point, when you're going through your life cycle of your product kind of validation, you've come up with your hypothesis, you're kind of always being conscious of any biases that are creeping in and trying to avoid them. What you want to be trying to do is these ever expanding test wings. So, you know, you start small with small user interviews, because they take up a lot of your time to sit on Zoom calls with people and source them. You then maybe kind of increase the fidelity of your ideas from sketches, and then you can run some unmoderated tests, which allows you to, you know, not be moderating every single one. And then again, as you continue down that process, you can run a survey to a much larger audience. Obviously, at any point in this process, if you did find some insights that you weren't expecting, or kind of changed your thoughts on a product idea or a feature set, you very much would want to kind of go back a step with that new insight and kind of run through this process again. So if something else came out, you might want to do some more user interviews, for example, and then build that into another round of surveys. So it's not necessarily a linear, you know, this can be run sometimes multiple streams in parallel. And the other thing just to mention is that obviously the costs, you know, this is always about kind of keeping your costs down. User interviews can be quite cheap. And we've got some more on that on some of the other slides.
So in moving on to just digging into each of those elements, what we have tried to do is we have organized what is that you can do, and then some tools in the market which you can easily use, and also put a time and cost estimate around it. So it really helps you to identify how economic and efficient it can be in both in terms of price and time and resource utilization to carry out a process like that. User interviews moderated. Essentially what it means is you talking to an end user one-to-one. I think as a best practice, you always want someone to be there on the side to take the notes, or at least record the session so that you can go back and listen in again. Now, who do you want on these interviews are people you have never met before. It's going back to the empathy bias thing. You absolutely want to avoid that. And at this particular stage, when you're just conceptualizing your idea, or even before that, if you're trying to identify what the problem is and who exactly is, which demographic group has the biggest pain point around this particular problem, it's better you choose a wide range of demographic. Like, for example, a 27-year-old in London, and maybe a 35-year-old in Leeds, and maybe a 45-year-old person somewhere in Kent. So you just want to choose a wider demographic group, because that would give you a real understanding of where is the biggest pain in the demographic group for the problem which you have identified. Now, how do you do that is you can just go to any public Facebook group. You can go to St. John's Wort Mums group, or something in Kent, Ashford about train journeys. Go into any of the groups, because ultimately when you post something that, hey, we want to interview some people regarding some of the issues, the widest range of people you get to talk to is very beneficial to you, because then you start identifying a bigger set of the problem which you have identified. Now, of course, in return, it would be very useful to give them something back. We recommend, just give them either Amazon vouchers or Apple Store or Play Store vouchers, which is a good token in return. If they are somewhere close by to you, maybe send them a can of beer or something like that, or a wine bottle. It's always a good gesture to do that. And how do you carry this out? Absolutely on a Zoom call or a Google Hangout. It does not require you anything extra. You could also, these tools like Zoom and Google Hangouts allow you to record the session as well. So it's much easier for you to go back and listen again what exactly were the points discussed. Also, what you want to make sure here is all your questions are open-ended in nature, totally unbiased and non-leading, and listen as much as possible. What we have identified is when we ask open-ended question to people, something like, can you tell us how do you manage your money? You would immediately find that people start telling stories that when I did this, when I wanted to plan to buy a house, I did this, then I went to my bank and I did this. So all of these stories would have a ton of information in there, which you definitely want to listen and then expand on it without pointing them in one single direction. For example, why do you say that there was a problem there? Or how did you know that there was a solution here? So open-ended question, which is non-biased in nature, would really help you understand what the actual genuine problem is. Now, it would take you maybe 2 to 3 days to carry out this, maybe a day to pre-plan some of the questions on, what if someone says this, how do I carry on the questioning, etc., etc. But at this point, please listen, record everything. Every point they make is a very important piece of information which you get from the genuine audience. Alex, you have a ton of experience doing it very recently. Do you want to share some of that key points?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I'm going to try and do as well is try and answer some of the questions that have been flooding in on the Q&A section. So yeah, it's really important just to build on Sushant's point about being open-ended with your questions. Now, so one of the questions here is, how long should you run these tests for? Typically, if you plan for kind of a 30-minute conversation, it's inevitable that you will run over into about 45 minutes. And usually, you know, when you advertise for people, going out for kind of a 1 hour slot is typically what you see. But if you have to build out your questions, and that's another thing to remember, try and lay out a structure of open-ended questions that you want to ask, and really look at those questions before you start recruiting people and say, am I leading people in any way by asking these questions? So that's a really important kind of tip, to like plan out your questions beforehand, really kind of consider whether you are introducing any bias. But yeah, typically 30 minutes to 45 minutes is a good kind of time to run them. In terms of recruiting, you know, for these tests, there are lots of platforms out there that allow you to do it. So usertesting.com, testingtime.com, Userlytics, People for Research. There's lots of ways that you can do that. I would just add a word of warning around professional testers, just to be cautious of that. But, you know, in a situation where we're not faced with a global pandemic, standing outside of Starbucks and offering to buy people's coffee for 20 minutes of their time is a very effective way of getting some, you know, unbiased, genuine feedback.
I know, Alex, what you tend to also do when I've listened to your user interviews, you try to disassociate yourself totally from the proposition. And
Yes.
you usually put it as, I'm just a consultant working for someone. Yeah. So if whatever you say is not going to impact me, so be as open as possible, which then removes any empathy which the person can have talking to you.
Yeah, a little white lie around your role in the testing, and, you know, just saying I'm a contractor, so anything you say is not going to offend me is okay. And just to kind of add on that, in my experience, you know, if you're asking people to do an hour Zoom call, anywhere from £50 to £75 for completely unknown, but at the same time, like I said, I've got people to chat to me for a coffee or for like a £20 gift card at Amazon. So there's various different ways. Obviously, if you're building a product for high net worth individuals, you know, a £20 voucher might not be as attractive. But on that note, another thing, if you are building an app, or, you know, if you work in the e-commerce space, stuff I've done before is use every opportunity to get data. So when I've run e-commerce testing groups, at the end we ask, oh, there's a £20 gift card for this, would you like an Amazon or an eBay voucher? And that gives you some insight on what is the preferred channel amongst your target audience. Or, you know, would you like an ASOS voucher or a Boohoo voucher or a Misguided voucher? And, you know, if you talk to 10, 20 people and the majority of them go for, I don't know, an eBay voucher, again, and that's another data point for you that could hopefully in the future inform maybe your channel fit and some of your dark market testing.
Absolutely.
So hopefully I've answered some of your questions that you've put in there. So yeah, and this next slide is around you know, your designs can be as low fidelity as you want. So if you dig into the Google Ventures Sprint and the design thinking methodology, there's a process called Crazy 8, and that's what you see there. That's a drawing of mine where you literally take 8 minutes to draw out 8 ideas. And you really do sketch them down, and so you don't have to be a designer at all, really. But you can also use things like, you know, spreadsheet. But something that I've also seen work really well is kind of borrowing designs. So you know, oh, it's going to be like that app, but it does something else. You know, taking screenshots of competitor apps and kind of cutting them together or modifying them is a really kind of cheap and quite effective way of kind of conceptualizing something, just to put in front of somebody to anchor them to your kind of questions that you're going to build out.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you can see, these are solutions which requires absolutely no money, and you just need to spend a couple of days thinking hard about it, on what questions you want to ask, what is the sort of visual aid which would help me answer that question better. That's all. So it's pretty easy. So Liz can actually carry out the moderated visual aid testing for as little as £0. If she did need to pay for user interviews, it could be another £100 or £200 on top, but that's all the money which is being spent at this point of time. And this is the point where you're actually trying to understand, is the problem which I have global enough or big enough for me to start building on this at the next step? Or if it is not a big enough problem, probably Liz can do something else, with her time. Moving on to unmoderated user interviews. Now, unmoderated user interviews is kind of the next step. So once you have identified the problem and you have probably looked at the problem and seen that, oh, okay, many people actually identified this particular problem. Now, let me think of a solution. Let me probably think of a concept which can address this particular problem. It could be a website, again, it could be a blog, it could be an app, it could be anything actually. Now, for me to go and then start testing this solution out, now you probably have limited amount of time to talk on Zoom or to talk to someone one-to-one all the time. And how do you scale up that particular activity is through unmoderated testing. Alex touched upon it briefly. There is tools like usertesting.com and userlytics.com. It's extremely easy to use. I myself am not a designer, but I could just go in there. It's mostly drag and drop. You can create a slide deck, a Google slide deck or a PowerPoint slide deck, upload it there, and maybe and you can just list out, these are the steps I want the user to carry out, and then the user carries out exactly those steps. It's totally recorded and you get a link from the recording. And once you have the recording, you can sit down and look at what happened during this particular interview. So it's not specific to any time. You can just upload the test. People take the test and you pay for each and every test. And when you get the results, you can sit down and analyze at your time. Now, in this particular situation, it's very necessary because you're not there to answer any questions from the user or ask the questions yourself. It's very necessary to set the correct context, set the correct goals, and be very specific around your questions, what you're asking. And the questions or the answers rather have to be unambiguous in nature. So you have to pre-plan a bit more, and hence this might take a week for you to plan it and put it out there. But once you put it out there, I remember the last time we did this, we put out something and within 3 or 4 hours, we got up to 10 unmoderated responses, which is really quick. Does not use up all of your time talking to people, and it's very easy and low cost as well. So because you're paying per test on these platforms, it might cost you about £100 to £200, a bit more, probably, depending on the length of your test. If it's a 15 minutes test, it's much cheaper. 30 is more expensive. 60 is way more expensive. So you have to really select that. Alex, is there anything you want to address on this from your experience?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to that, when you move to like unmoderated tests, you just need to ensure that you have got a bit more structure around how you lay it out. Google Slides is a really great tool for kind of adding some context. But another method that I've used quite well is kind of a talking head video. So you know there's Chrome plugins that you can get that are free that will allow you to record your screen and your webcam at the same time. And you just talk through kind of, if it's one of my awful sketches, you can do a talking video kind of explaining what the top part is, what the bottom part is, and that is a way that allows you to kind of add some context to your rough drawings, but also frees up your time. You record that video once and then you can distribute it through these platforms. So yeah, that's quite a good kind of trick to save your time. But when you are looking at kind of unmoderated user interviews, as I said, it's really important to have kind of more structured visual aids. So there's a couple of tools that we use to do that. So Miro is a really good tool. It's like an interactive whiteboard, and if you go into the apps section, there's a whole free wireframing section, so you can click out and very easily build out, you know, like a home screen, a login flow, and so on and so forth. It's, you know, a SaaS platform, so it's charging £10 a month, so, you know, really affordable, and it allows you to quickly ideate your ideas. I'm in no way a designer, but I'm able to kind of conceptualize some ideas in Miro. If you are working with the team as well, it's a good tool to allow kind of collaborative feedback. If you've got a little bit more time and you want to kind of increase the fidelity of the prototypes and your ideas, tools like Figma, which are a bit more kind of design focused, allow you to not only come up with some screens or process flows, but they also allow you to create interaction design, so you can very easily create clickable prototypes with something like Figma or InVision, for example. Again, without having to write a single line of code, without having to engage kind of a professional UI UX designer, you're able to get your ideas onto one of these platforms. Obviously, if you're a little bit more design inclined, there are tools like, you know, Photoshop and Sketch available. Again, not prohibitively expensive. I would say that, you know, if you're going to that extent of using Sketch, something like Figma is really good because of the interaction. And I don't work for those guys. It's quite a good tool. So the next slide, I mentioned about it earlier, is kind of Crazy Eights, and here you can see one of our Crazy Eights for a user journey. And so it really does start off with an idea, and then you kind of lay out your process flows literally on a piece of paper. If anyone's interested, uistencils.com allows you to get flip charts that are basically iPhones, and you can have that on your desk and sketch out your ideas. But once you've sketched out these ideas, going into a tool like Miro or Figma, or even, you know, if you want going on these platforms for freelancers like Upwork or Fiverr, to kind of turn these into a more polished design for you to be able to put onto an unmoderated test, is a really kind of cost-effective way to do it. And again, we've got some screenshots there of Figma, and, you know, it is click and drag. It's really easy to kind of build out your screens for unmoderated test. Really cheap. Not a single line of code.
Yeah. So it comes down to the point where if you are not a coder, you don't have a CTO, does not mean you cannot prototype your concept or an idea. There are tons of tools out there. We have listed it there. Of course, at the end of it, we would try and share this deck with everyone, so everyone has access to all the names which we have listed down here. Yeah. Okay.
And then, yeah, just to kind of build on this point here, is platforms like user testing, userlytics, testing time, people for research. Once you've got your designs, and just to answer one of the questions that came in, isn't lower fidelity the better at this stage? Yes, I mean, low fidelity is, you know, is good, but sometimes in unmoderated tests, users do need a little higher levels of fidelity, a little bit more context. So using kind of a low to mid fidelity clickable prototype with a like talking head video to give it a bit of context, uploaded to a platform like user testing, it's kind of a really quick and easy way for somebody who isn't a designer or a developer to be able to kind of get the concept across to somebody, because that's really what you're trying to do at this stage. You know, the designs may totally change. They probably will if your idea kind of gets off the ground. It's not about the design at this stage. It's about kind of proving the idea and proving the hypothesis and validating it.
Yeah. Just to note, I realize we are very short on time. We might need another 15 minutes to finish this. So apologies for that. If anyone had to run at 7, go away, that's, I think Liz and Katie are recording this, and they would make the recording available to everyone. But we will try and finish, and I think we would be about 15 minutes after 7 when we finish it. So moving on from the user testing part to the survey part. Now survey comes into picture when you really want to scale up your user testing. Now, you can talk to 7 people or 100 people, definitely, if you do have the time and energy to do that, or find people to do it. Alternatively, what we tend to do is we talk to 7 or 14 people, and then after that particular point, as Alex mentioned earlier, there are teams which start forming. There are problem areas which starts getting defined by themselves. The solution starts defining by themselves, and we take those, create maybe either prototype or create surveys around it, and then start publishing that out on one of the tools, like, for example, SurveyMonkey or surveys.google.com's, smartsurvey.co.uk. Now, the beauty of these things are that you can you can buy responses. So by paying like anywhere between £1 to £3.5 per response, you're able to reach out to people who you otherwise cannot. And like, for example, the last time we got 1,000 responses in less than 24 hours. That is incredible amount of information. You know, that is the sort of information you cannot get unless you build a product and go and release it out. And if you can do that by creating a very decent SurveyMonkey survey or a Google survey, it's very effective in nature. Now, again, at this point of time, you probably already have a solution in your mind for the problem which you are trying to address. So having a bit more structure, having a bit more definition really helps. Some of the things where you can test out as a solution, the concept itself, and also willingness to pay. We recently did our willingness to pay testing. Unfortunately, our time would not allow us to touch on willingness to pay, but we are happy to do another session on willingness to pay because it's a very big topic and we spent tons of hours researching about it itself. Alex, anything you wanted to add quickly on this section?
No, I think you've covered it. I think it's just a good point to say is, you know, use surveys only to validate the stuff that you've learned from your moderated and unmoderated tests previously. Don't jump straight into a survey, because you know, it's very important to get those early clusters of ideas or clusters of pain points that you can only really get by moderated and unmoderated tests and digging a little bit deeper. And once you've got that, then, you know, step into the survey world, because it will either prove or disprove that kind of pain point or that thing that you've uncovered through your user testing. So yeah, it's really important to do the user interviews first.
Okay. So in terms of the tools which you can use, there's surveymonkey.com and surveys.google.com. It gives you access to a really big demographic group. You can even select the demographic group. You can even target it. Like, for example, there are filters like what is the age group you want to target? What is the household income you want to target? What is a region within the world you can target? So sitting here, you can even do a survey for New Zealand, for example, and not just New Zealand, a city within New Zealand. And that's the beauty of it, because these are tools where they have reached to multiple bigger demographic. You can get all the information that you need to survey about. And it, you know, SurveyMonkey costs you like somewhere between £3 and £10 per month, depending on the number of questions you want to ask, and £3.5 per response. Surveys.google.com is absolutely free to use as such upfront, but you need to pay for responses. And all of these are responses. They're not your friends, they're not your family, so they're more trustworthy. These tools also come with a lot of analytics after the testing has been done and the responses have been achieved. Like, for example, shown there, one of our questions like, would you like to use this particular feature, or what is the chances that you're going to use this feature? And the answers come out in beautiful graph, which you can essentially copy paste and use it in your pitch decks or your business plan. So it's very useful, cheap, and very fast to implement. I quickly move on to the dark market testing. I think this is a part where I myself had very little exposure to before Alex came in and talked about it, and then we were able to run it, and we find it very, very useful. And I think most of the people on this audience would also want to be listening a bit more carefully if you're not already.
So no pressure then. So yeah, just to recap, so dark market testing or kind of canary testing is, like I said earlier, is a concept that has come from paid media campaigns. So traditionally, if you're going to spend £1 million on Facebook ads, or you know, £500,000 on your next Google shopping feed, before you invested that much money, what you'd want to do is run some tests on ad copy, and run some tests on creative, and run some tests on kind of your audience targeting. You know, we're targeting Gen Zs, Gen Ys, and we're targeting kind of an older demographic. You'd run some kind of smaller tests or ad groups sometimes. And you'd see which of your ads got kind of better engagement, more likes, more shares, more click-through rates. Well, that's been kind of taken and evolved for the product market. And what dark market testing allows you to do is kind of define who your audience is. So at the very beginning, when you start out with your concept, your idea, like, you know, hopefully you're trying to solve a problem for kind of a segment of people. So really, who are those people? So you start, when you run dark market testing, by kind of defining who you think. But one of the kind of bits of advice is to not be too prescriptive on setting your audience. You know, I want to speak to men in London from 25 to 35, because who knows, you know, you may be able to reach people in a wider audience that your product may also appeal to. So it gives a wider, it gives an insight into maybe a possible market that you haven't thought of before. So how do you get in front of them? So the reason it's called dark market testing is because it's usually a disposable brand. You don't want to use your own brand. You don't want to use your own kind of typography, colors, logos, or screen. In previous cases, I have to be careful about what I share, but people will go and buy disposable domain names and create kind of fake brands for the purpose of running these dark market tests. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to gauge people's appetite for product feature sets. It's really effective for willingness to pay surveys. You know, you can put 10 adverts out on a Facebook audience or an Instagram audience for your app, and one can have the price point of 99p, another one can have a price point of 4.99, another one will have a price point of 19.95. And if you get that in front of enough people, you know, the bell curve will appear, and you'll be able to kind of work out where is kind of a sweet spot for your kind of willingness to pay, is just one example. So ways of getting in front of people, the most common ones, and like I said, it's a methodology that Facebook use, testing their kind of feature set in New Zealand and in Australia, before rolling it out to their larger, arguably more critical markets in the EU and the US. But again, it doesn't have to be that expensive. You know, buying a domain name, £20, buying kind of a landing page tool. There's things like Unbounce or Lead Pages, which again are kind of £20, £25 a month. A template for that page. And the important thing is, because you're not that concerned about brand positioning or naming, you really are just trying to get the insight. You can very quickly just use a theme, use a template, and set up some ads quite quickly.
So Alex, just to understand and to bring it into layman terms, is you're running some fake advertisements.
Yeah.
If I may use the word, fake advertisements on a market which is very similar to the potential market you want to be in. So for example, if Liz wants to build a spending analysis platform for the UK, she does some dummy messages on advertisement, maybe buys a domain name lisaapp.nz and runs the same advertisement in New Zealand, because what then would happen is, depending on who clicks on it and how much cost is attributed to each of those clicks, you have a better understanding of who your end user is going to be and how much is it going to cost you to acquire those users.
Yes, and I just want to kind of be conscious that people don't go off and start testing all their products in New Zealand. Yeah, you can test it obviously in the UK in a London market. But yes, typically, you know, if you've come up with an idea for your app, for your product, for your, you know, new pair of jeans, whatever it might be, and you want to get some kind of validation around a feature set or some messaging positioning on platforms like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is, for about anywhere from £3 to £5 per CPM, so that's per 1,000 impressions, you are able to get your adverts in front of people. And so it's always about having contrasting ads. So you might have, in Lisa's example, you might have an app that says, you know, an ad, sorry, that shows a feature set of a pie chart, and it says you spent this much on shopping and this much on travel, whereas another feature set might be you know, you spent £200 on Ubers this month, for example, and you run 2 ads, you get them in front of maybe 5,000 people each, and the one that has kind of the highest click-through rate or the highest kind of likes is the one that has that you know, is the feature set that is most resonating for your audience.
Yeah.
Just
so you know, I want to put a word of caution here. So things like regulated businesses, like financial trading or health related businesses, there would be a block probably from Facebook if you try to put an ad which is extremely regulated in nature, like gambling, for example. I know in Facebook is highly regulated, trading is highly regulated, but this sort of methodology essentially can work with any other sort of business where there is no money, trading, gambling, or health related issues involved.
Yeah, and just to touch on that, you know, if you are pushing people through to a landing page where you're asking people to ultimately sign up, you do want to make sure that you have kind of a cookie policy and a privacy policy in place on that landing page. There's many templates available on the internet. In terms of kind of one of the questions here is about what does successful click-through rates. So it's when you're running dark market tests, it's not always necessarily about the specific click-through rate that you're looking at. It's about the comparison between your 2 ads. So in the example where you promote one feature set of your imaginary Liz's app versus another one, it's not necessarily that one has a 2% click-through rate and one has a 3% click-through rate, or let's say 10% click-through rate. It's the difference in those click-through rates that you're looking for. So running an individual test on its own is not as insightful as running a series of tests.
Yeah, and I think in addition to that, it's also the metadata you receive about the customers who are clicking it, right? So for example, in Facebook, when an advertisement is run and someone clicks through, it gives you a beautiful chart on your business ad manager, the age and the gender balance, the where the region and what sort of people are clicking it, and that is also invaluable amount of information which informs you about your business value proposition.
Yeah, and just to add on that, I mean, it's not, you don't have to position your ads as like a coming soon app or like sign up for an app. You can position it as this app exists. You know, it's a made up domain name, it's a made up brand, it's a made up landing page, it's completely disposable. You know, you really want to test, asking people, I think somebody said here, you know, how do you test willingness to pay? It's really hard, and absolutely it is. We could talk about it for a long time, but asking people to do forward thinking answers to questions is never really going to give you the most insight. So when you run dark market tests, you don't necessarily have to run it as, you know, launching soon type app. Run it as this app exists and this is how, these are the features, or this product exists and this is what it looks like. Then that gives you real kind of insight, real data as to kind of what people's engagement levels are like. But do make sure you have cookie policy and privacy policy in place. But I think the point to take away is that, again, it's really, really cheap. In one campaign that I ran, we spent about £10,000 on ad spend, and that got us in front of about 2.5–3 million people. So to be able to go to investors, VCs, and say, look, we've tested these features, first through user testing interviews, then through surveys, and then we've put this feature set through to 2.5 million people. We had a 15% click-through rate. It's all about reducing risk and building confidence in your feature set, your product offering. And again, you haven't had to at this stage actually build an app. Start marketing. Once you're done with that, never use the domain again, and it's gone. And the data that you get really would help inform any future marketing that you might do around this metadata. So you may find that your product resonates with, men in a certain area in London that also like the Top Gear page and follow some celebrity, and the data that you can get from some of these platforms is really, really insightful to help you build out a future launch campaign, which makes sure that your budget spend in the future will go a lot further.
Yeah, and I know for a fact when you get in front of your angel investors or venture capital investors, definitely the questions around, okay, you build a revenue forecast, how confident are you? And when you have information like the click-through rate or the cost per acquisition or cost per impression, that is invaluable information. Absolutely. Like, if you have that sort of information, you automatically are differentiating yourself from all the other 100 other pitches which exist in that in the room. So I think we've come to the end of what we wanted to discuss. So what we have discussed is definitely everything that you can do without having a CTO, without having knowing how to code, or without having to raise investment, just by yourself or maybe a group of friends coming together and testing out the application, the business idea, the solution, the problem, the concept itself. And also, if you want to get to the point where you want to really test it out in social media, you can go and test it out in social media. Please do not do it for any regulated entities, otherwise you will be banned. But if it is something like selling clothes, selling t-shirts and things like that, there's no harm done, because even if someone clicks, they're not paying for it, you are paying for it. So there's no harm done from a consumer side who's clicking on that advertisement. Yes, you have used up 2 seconds of their time on social media, but I think for what you want as an end result, that's a very small price to pay. Now, those are our email addresses. You can reach out to us if you did have any further thoughts or questions around anything that we discussed, or if you need. Alex kindly created this LinkedIn group. It's called as a Product Validation EU, because he could not find a better name on LinkedIn. So you can join that and we can continue the discussion if you like there. We will also try and publish this slide deck through Liz and Katie to whoever have joined today. There were a ton of questions which came in before the session itself, and we have put them here. We will quickly go through these and then try and address the questions which might have come otherwise. Unfortunately, we have breached the time which we promised to, but we are happy to stay and answer these questions. Katie or Liz, is there a concern around time?
Nope, it's perfect. If you're happy to stay, we're happy to hear from you. That'd be brilliant.
Okay. Thank you. So we'll quickly run through these questions. Alex, just dive in as and when you feel necessary on these questions.
Well, I'll take the questions that have gone on Zoom, because there's a couple of questions here that people have been upvoting.
Okay. So let me quickly go through these and we can jump onto the Q&A ones, which is on Zoom. Can the speakers please share their views on developing marketing and sales strategy before and versus the MVP is ready? Right. So I just created a random slide to explain where this could be done. So if you look at this particular graph, it's kind of a time chart: problem discovery, solution discovery, concept building, prototype, business plan, building a product. And while along the journey, you want to do most of the things yourself, ask your friends or get mentors to help you out. While each of these stages are going through, definitely do user interviews, moderated and unmoderated, and surveys and dark market testing, as Alex alluded to. Your market strategy, sales, marketing and sales strategy is a very important component of your business plan. Absolutely. Without that, you cannot go and put it in front of any angel investor or a co-founder or other. So from my little experience, I would say you would want to do that once you have built enough confidence in your own concept, build a prototype, tested it out, and you are at a stage where you're ready to do market testing, dark market testing. Once you do the dark market testing, it also gives you information like, do your core group of audience exist on Facebook, or do they exist on Instagram, or do they exist on LinkedIn? So you want to really select the channel where you want to market, because marketing is going to, marketing costs can balloon very easily and go out of control if you don't know which channels you want to target to. And I think, Alex, you're better placed to answer this further.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the hardest things to do from outside in is to kind of forecast customer acquisition costs. You know, you can read and Google all the survey and all the results, but until you actually run some ads and start getting click-through rate and start getting CPMs, you know, it's really, really, really impossible to kind of accurately forecast that. But on the flip side is that even from a relatively small and relatively quick and cheap campaign that you can run, you can very quickly get highly accurate estimations on what those costs are. And you can also be very, very targeted with your ads to make sure that your budget for marketing can go, you know, a lot further, and you can stage out your kind of your sales and marketing campaigns so that, you know, from your dark market testing that you ran, you found that you got the highest click-through rate and the highest levels of engagement with this segment of society. So I will launch my product focusing on those kind of customers first, because hopefully my kind of conversion will be higher with them, and I'll use my ad spend to target them. But then as your product gets users and gets engagement, you can then start to broaden that market out. But, you know, being able to really hone in, and that's kind of the benefit of some of these platforms now, that they use so much data about you. You can be very prescriptive of who you're targeting, and you can make a little ad spend go a long way. Yeah.
Going to the next specific question, there was a question around how do you get feedback for your products and ideas while protecting your IP? I think this one, we did have faced the same issue, and we used NDA using PandaDocs and DocuSign. It's extremely easy to use. It just goes as a link to the end user who you're testing with. They can just sign digitally. The other thing we have found is no matter how novel your idea is, unless you have the passion to make it, no one else is going to steal it. They may try to make something of it, but if they lack the passion to solve the problem which you have, more likely than not, someone else is going to fail by stealing your idea. But of course, using an NDA do protect yourself against it. Plus, the people you're talking to, if they're not in the immediate demographic group, or it's not your classmate at INSEAD, then it's very highly unlikely they're also starting to start a business.
Just to add to that as well, like when you're going through the user moderated tests, it's not really about talking to those users and presenting them with a solution. It really is about understanding their pain points and their problems. So you know, you really don't need to kind of expose anything that you think is kind of protected, or, you know, really insightful innovation on your part, because you really at that stage want to understand them. I think when you move into some of the higher fidelity prototypes, obviously there's some risk of kind of exposing something, but very often that is kind of a front end experience. It's, you know, how does it look and how does it solve the problem kind of for the customer. As anyone will know, it's the stuff underneath and how you connect it all together, which, you know, people answering a survey or people seeing an ad on Facebook or Instagram or something like that, you know, you haven't given any insight away there. You may have alluded to it from your designs, but, you know, alluding to it is not kind of giving away your secret sauce. So I think it's more about listening to the users at this stage and really understanding the pain points and trying to kind of get in front of them a solution to it, rather than telling them how you plan to do that.
Yeah. And there were a couple of questions around CTO and when is the right time to hire a CTO, or do I need experience with coding, blah, blah, blah. And so as we discussed throughout, you know, whatever we discuss, you really don't need any coding experience, or you don't need a CTO. You know, I come from a technology background myself, and it pains me to say that I'm not the essential person in building or building a conceptualization of an idea. And if you are not a developer, not a tech person, it does not stop you, because the tool set which is available out there, which are very economic in nature, extremely self-DIY type of products, can be used to get to a point where you're able to comfortably raise investment with your concept, with your validation, with your prototyping. In my humble experience, you can actually delay the hire of a CTO till much after you raise your fund, because once you raise your fund, you have the money to go and get the best talent. Technology is not something which is going to stop you from validating the concept idea, but having a good technology person is very, very important to convert your idea into actually a product. So you don't want to settle for something which is not good enough, or you hire a grad out of university. Probably he might be really good, but to make them understand what your concept is and things like that, and to have a really good quality product out in the market, you want someone experienced out there, for which you need a ton of money. So unless it's someone who has bought into the idea themselves, wait for fundraising, wait for that money to come into the bank account, and then go hire a CTO. It makes so much more effective choice of your funds at that moment of time.
Can I answer some of these questions in the Q&A now, just because of time?
Yes. Okay.
We've got Julia here. How do you really test willingness to pay? People will generally want to pay as little as possible for a solution. Absolutely right, 100% correct. I don't know if we've got enough time to answer that here. It's quite a complex methodology, combining surveys, interviews and dark market testing to get a really good insight on willingness to pay. It's an activity we've done quite recently, actually. Maybe we could give another talk on that, but if not, drop us an email or join the LinkedIn group. Happy to kind of explore it there. But generally, you're right. If you ask somebody, how much are you willing to pay for this? They're going to say, I want it for free.
Yeah.
We had that. But I think I gave an analogy earlier about running some dark market tests with different price points for your product or solution, and then looking at the kind of the bell curve that you'll get from kind of click-through rates, and then kind of making the best educated guess. You'll be able to see what the drop-off point is.
Yes. And one more thing I want to add there, Alex, is, and you can read this in multiple places, is past behavior is the best estimation of what the future behavior is going to be. So when you are testing, you want to test the willingness to pay on a certain product. I think you're better off starting with what are the subscriptions you currently use, what are the products you currently pay for, and approximately how much do you pay for it. So for example, if you're on a financial services app, you can ask them, okay, do you pay for a credit card, for having an American Express credit card, or do you pay for any of these podcasts which is related? So any of those behaviors, can give you an idea of what is the willingness to pay for the person. But it's not necessarily for the product which you're asking for, but it kind of gives you a brief idea. And then add that up with survey information and dark market testing information, you would get a range. And let me be very cautiously telling this, no one can ever tell you what is the price point by dot. It is always going to be a range. It's going to be between 10 and 20 pounds. But when you launch the product, I think the product managers do a very good role of, or even marketing product managers do a very good role of exactly splitting A/B testing, advertising the same thing for 10 pounds, 15 pounds, 20 pounds, and seeing where does the curve fall off. And wherever the curve fall off is where your willingness to pay for the customer is.
Yeah, it's a really interesting area of testing, but I think dark market testing is really valuable there. Nicholas had another question. Is there a danger that the quality of your dark market ad skills may skew outcome of potential popularity of an underlying product? Yes, is the short answer. Absolutely. And there's loads of kind of best practice guides in terms of how to set up highly converting landing pages and Facebook ads or Instagram ads or Twitter ads or LinkedIn ads, whatever it might be. I think the most important note there is not try to test too much with a single ad. People who are kind of new to dark market testing try and test lots of different elements on a single ad. You really want to standardize your testing, even as much as kind of standardizing the language, the wording, the coloring, because, you know, if you're running two ads around, let's say Liz's app, and one is priced at £9.95 and the other's priced at £4.95, but one is red and one is blue, you don't want like the difference in color to be influencing a click-through rate. So you want to try and standardize as much as possible across your tests. And so on these platforms, you're not charged per what's called ad group or per ad that you run. You know, you're purely charged for impressions or kind of clicks, depending on what methodology you go for. So, and I would suggest impressions, just as a side note, is the best way to go for this type of testing. But when you do that, you want to really set up a campaign of ads that is very specific for something you want to test, either a price point on willingness to pay or a specific feature, and then standardize everything else, like the coloring, the screenshot that you might use of your imaginary app, the features that you call out, the tagline that you put on. Keep as much as similar as possible and really test one thing. If there are lots of things you want to test, run more competing tests. Don't try and test them all kind of in a single test. That's the most kind of common, I would say, point of failure for that. But you're absolutely right, there are other factors that can influence click-through rate and so on and so forth.
So I'm really cautious of time.
Yeah.
What we'll do is we'll stay on this for 3 more minutes, and any further questions which we have not addressed, maybe it's worth taking that on to either our, you know, you can email us the question or just go to the LinkedIn group and ask the question, and we can have a discussion there. If there was interest in following up with any specific survey related questions or dark market testing related stuff, we can organize another session maybe in a couple of weeks. But I really want to thank everyone who joined today. It was our first time presenting this sort of content, and it's purely from our experience. And I thought this could be useful to many of the people. Thank you, Alex, for taking time to talk about your experience. That's especially around user testing and dark market testing. It's quite valuable. I would take my slide deck back to the email address and the LinkedIn group. If anyone wants to reach out, please do. We will try send the deck across to all of you who have attended through Katie and Liz. So you guys can look at the details in there, and any questions, please reach out to us. Thank you for the opportunity, Katie and Liz.
Thank you so much for your time today. There's just so much information in this session, so that's brilliant. And you know, great job going through so many questions. And what I'll do is we'll send out the slide deck and hopefully a recording of this to everybody that's registered. So there'll be some people that couldn't make it, and they'll get that too. And we'll put your email addresses in there so people can follow up with you directly. And thank you once again so much for your time today. This was great. Take care.
Thank you everyone.